found this very interesting. It's a steam valve. It didn't come from here. It landed on the wreck after the stern had settled.
Many people believe the story of the Titanic was simple and complete. An iceberg appeared, the ship struck it, and the tragedy unfolded without further mystery.
The iceberg scrapes along the side of the hull and rips this very thin but very catastrophic gash in the side of the hull.
But in the 2022, a discovery on the ocean floor shattered that familiar narrative.
Special technology to map the entire ship on the ocean floor and create its digital twin.
A camera that had been preserved in the cold and darkness for more than 100 years revealed images that no one ever expected to find. The camera that should never have survived. Researchers sent to the Titanic in the 2022 had a main goal to record corrosion patterns on the remaining structure and surrounding debris. No one expected anything unusual. The atmosphere inside the control room felt calm and focused. Everyone thought the day would end with charts, measurements, and predictable findings. That expectation shattered when one of the remotely operated vehicles drifted across an unremarkable patch of the debris field and detected something that should not have been there at all. At first, the object looked like a small, worn container that had broken apart a long time ago. It rested half buried in the cold silt, still and forgotten. When the ROV angled its light toward the object, the beam cut through the heavy darkness and exposed a circular shape that did not belong to a simple box. The shape was a lens socket. The team realized they were looking at a camera that had somehow survived more than a century in a crushing environment that should have destroyed it without hesitation. The researchers froze, and shock spread through the control room. A camera was not supposed to exist in its original form at a depth of roughly 12,000 feet. The pressure should have flattened the casing. The salt water should have destroyed every trace of leather and metal. The film inside should have dissolved long ago. Yet the object remained intact. It became clear that a chain of unusual events had protected it. When the Titanic tore apart, the camera must have slipped into an unusually soft and stable pocket of sediment that shielded it from the force. The freezing temperatures of the deep Atlantic slowed every natural process that normally causes decay. The film chamber had sealed itself tightly enough to prevent water from entering and destroying the gelatin inside. Every part of this survival felt almost impossible. Still, it had happened, and everyone in the room felt an overwhelming sense of disbelief, mixed with a growing sense of fear and responsibility. The strangeness deepened when the team noticed faint initials etched into the metal surface. The letters appeared to read BG. Once the team confirmed the markings, historians identified a match with Benjamin Guggenheim. He was one of the wealthiest passengers on the Titanic and was remembered for calmly changing into evening wear as the ship was sinking. No one could say with certainty whether he had used the camera or whether someone else had carried it. What mattered was the discovery that this object was not a simple relic that someone had brought aboard for leisure. It was a device that could hold evidence from the final hours of the ship. That realization struck the team with a sense of heartbreak because it meant that someone on board had attempted to preserve moments that the world never expected to see. Inside the sealed roll of film, there might be the last photographs ever taken on the Titanic. Those frames could confirm or challenge the accepted version of how the disaster unfolded. The film might reveal actions, conditions, or decisions that had never been documented. The possibility forced the researchers into a difficult emotional struggle. If they opened the camera, they risked destroying the fragile film forever. If they kept it sealed, they would leave the truth locked inside, where no one could learn from it. The choice felt unbearable. The team felt the weight of history and the fear of making the wrong decision. They decided to attempt something that no one had ever tried on film this old. They chose to read the images without opening the camera. Every person involved understood the risk. They also understood that it might be the only chance to save whatever remained on the film. The images that humans were never supposed to see. Inside a carefully climate-stabilized room, the research team tried to keep every movement quiet. The temperature and humidity had been set with extreme precision. The air barely stirred. The conditions were so delicate that even a single footstep in the hallway could cause vibrations that would interfere with the readings. Dr. Jeremiah Tanaka's team understood how fragile this moment was. They had prepared neutron tomography scanners that had originally been designed to investigate the internal structure of very dense meteorites. These scanners were built to reveal tiny differences in material density without damaging what they studied. No one on the team had ever expected to use this technology on a camera from 1912. The idea felt unbelievable, yet the basic principles still applied. The scanners would detect microscopic variations inside the camera and would reconstruct the internal layout without touching the fragile object. They would also use advanced artificial intelligence to process the delicate signals and turn them into recognizable shapes. When the first neutron pulse passed through the metal casing of the camera, an enormous wave of data began to flow into the system. Billions of measurements appeared as raw points that slowly formed a spiral pattern. This spiral shape was the tightly wound roll of film. Each layer of the film had hardened over time until it felt as rigid as stone. Ordinary X-rays could not have penetrated the film with enough detail. Light sensors were completely useless. Neutrons, however, could reveal tiny differences in density around the old silver crystals that had once reacted to sunlight in 1912. Some parts of the film had been exposed to bright daylight. Other parts had been exposed to dim conditions. These variations created chemical changes that now appeared as faint shadows in the neutron data. The artificial intelligence system that processed the data acted like a translator. It examined each shadow and interpreted every density change. It rebuilt these patterns as pixels so that the old film could be seen again. At first, the images looked like uncertain shapes. They were shaky outlines that suggested objects, but did not yet reveal complete scenes. The team waited in tense silence as the reconstruction program continued to refine the details. With each moment, the outlines sharpened. More structure appeared. Eventually, the first clear frame formed on the screen. The room grew silent as the researchers stared at the image. It showed a group of passengers standing near the bow of the Titanic. They appeared calm, but their attention had clearly been drawn to something unsettling. They were looking at pieces of floating ice scattered across an otherwise peaceful sea. The timestamp, which had been preserved in a chemical layer on the film, indicated a time in the late afternoon of April 14, 1912. This detail offered undeniable evidence that the crew and passengers had seen signs of dangerous ice long before the disaster took place. The realization struck the team with a sense of shock. They had expected interesting photographs, but they had not expected evidence that challenged the accepted historical narrative. Another frame appeared. It revealed the first-class dining saloon. The room glowed with electric light that reflected off polished surfaces. The passengers looked relaxed and cheerful. They had no awareness of the threat that surrounded the ship. The contrast between their comfort and the warning signs seen earlier felt deeply painful. The team could almost feel the heartbreak of witnessing a moment of joy that existed only hours before tragedy. Then a new image surfaced, and it stunned everyone in the room. It showed the iceberg itself at a time only minutes before the collision. Historians had always believed that no photograph of the actual iceberg approaching the Titanic had ever existed. Yet this frame contradicted that belief. The iceberg appeared as a dark and towering mass that cut across the horizon. The sight was unsettling because it meant that someone had been close enough and aware enough to attempt to capture the danger on film. These discoveries were not merely interesting historical findings. They revealed contradictions in the official accounts. They suggested that members of the crew had recognized dangers earlier than reported. They indicated that testimonies given after the sinking did not align with what the camera recorded. They raised the possibility that the events of 1912 had been simplified or shaped in ways that protected powerful individuals or organizations at the time. And as the scans continued, the frames grew darker, stranger, and harder to explain. What appeared next didn't just question the Titanic story, it tore massive holes in it, pulling the investigation into territory no historian had prepared for. Frames that shattered a century of accepted history. The next series of images shocked the entire research team in a way none of them expected. When they reached the frame taken at 1:45 a.m. on April 15th, the atmosphere in the lab changed. The photos showed Lifeboat 1 being lowered toward the water, but it was not filled to its intended capacity, and it was not being managed with the calm order described in many historical accounts. Several seats were empty, even while crowds of terrified passengers waited behind the officers. The most disturbing part of this frame was the presence of grown men stepping into the boat while women and children remained on the deck. For more than 100 years, historians believed that Officer William Murdoch had strictly enforced the rule that women and children would be sent first on his side of the ship. The photograph challenged that belief in a very direct way. It showed Murdoch helping both men and women into the boat. This contradicted sworn testimonies and raised serious questions about how accurately the events had been recorded. Another frame presented a moment that changed the long-accepted story of Bruce Ismay, who was the head of the White Star Line. The world had believed that he pushed ahead of others to save himself. Newspapers described him as a man who panicked and forced his way into a lifeboat. The newly recovered image showed something different. It captured him helping a small child into safety. His face looked tense, but his focus appeared entirely on the child. This did not match any version of the disaster that had been repeated in books, documentaries, or official reports. Then another image appeared that resolved one of the longest arguments in Titanic history. It showed Captain Edward Smith standing on the bridge at 1:45 a.m. He was clearly giving orders to his officers, and he looked calm, despite the chaos around him. Many official accounts claimed that he disappeared earlier or that he abandoned his command. The photograph proved that he remained at his post until the water began to rise around the wheelhouse. His leadership did not falter during the final moments of the ship. The next frame was deeply unsettling. It showed the ship's band performing on a deck that was already tilted at a dangerous angle. Witnesses had sworn for years that they heard the musicians play until the very end. Many experts dismissed these descriptions as emotional memories created during trauma. The image showed the truth. The musicians stood together while people around them struggled to survive. Their instruments reflected the cold starlight. They continued to play while the world collapsed around them. The most heartbreaking image showed a mother kneeling in front of her child. She wrapped the child in a coat and handed her to a crew member. Her face revealed the fear of someone who understood that she would never see her child again. This frame carried emotional weight that no written testimony could ever match. Together, these images revealed clear patterns. Survivor statements conflicted with one another. Official reports did not match what the photographs showed. Timelines that had been accepted for decades did not make sense when compared with the visual evidence. Historians later realized that many testimonies had been shaped by fear and guilt. Some statements had also been influenced by pressure from the British and American inquiry boards. These photographs from the Guggenheim collection became the first completely unfiltered witnesses of what truly happened on that night. They captured events without fear, without pride, and without the need to protect reputations. But the images weren't finished reshaping the narrative, because when researchers compared them with archival photographs, digitized and enhanced through AI, they uncovered details that were never visible before. Details that suggested the Titanic was compromised long before it even touched the iceberg. To understand this deeper failure, the team began analyzing every historical photo of the ship, and what they found exposed a hidden weakness buried in Titanic's very construction. AI enhancements reveal Titanic was already damaged before she sailed. Once the Guggenheim frames were examined, the team began a massive effort to verify every detail shown in the images. They gathered every confirmed Titanic photograph that existed. The collection included the ship's blueprints, shipyard photographs taken during construction, interior photographs from promotional materials, formal crew portraits, and valuable glass plate negatives stored in archives for more than a century. At first, the intention was simple. Researchers wanted to compare the old images with the newly discovered frames. When advanced artificial intelligence systems processed the photographs, the results went far beyond what anyone expected. In some early construction photographs of the hull, the enhancement systems used thermal and density filters. These tools highlight subtle differences in material temperature and strength. The filters revealed a faint heat pattern near an area known as Coal Bunker W. Historians had long debated the possibility of a coal fire that may have started before the voyage and continued burning as the ship traveled across the Atlantic. Most experts had dismissed this idea due to a lack of direct evidence. The enhanced photograph changed that. It showed discoloration that matched the type of long-term high heat exposure that weakens steel. This strongly suggested that part of the hull was already compromised before the Titanic ever left Belfast. Another set of enhanced images examined the ship's rivets. There were thousands of them. Artificial intelligence magnified each rivet and revealed clusters of tiny cracks that were too small for human eyes to notice. Metallurgists later confirmed that these cracks were consistent with low-grade iron. This type of iron was often used when shipyards faced material shortages. The official investigation in 1912 never mentioned this problem. The enhanced photographs offered proof that the ship was built with flawed materials that weakened under stress. One of the most alarming discoveries came from a photograph of a crew muster taken just days before the ship departed. Artificial intelligence enhancement revealed a folded slip of paper in a sailor's hand. When the image was magnified and clarified, faint letters appeared. The writing indicated an unlogged iceberg warning. According to all official records, this warning was never placed in the ship's navigational log. The photographs suggested that the crew may have received information that was never passed along or formally documented. Interior photographs revealed more troubling details. In a picture taken inside the first-class reading room, enhancement revealed the silhouette of a woman who was not listed on any passenger manifest. Another photograph on the starboard promenade showed a reflection in the glass. The reflection was of a photographer whose face matched no known crew member or passenger. Archival cross-reference suggested that at least one person boarded the ship without being recorded. The more the artificial intelligence uncovered, the clearer the pattern became. The Titanic sailed with weakened steel, ignored warnings, substandard materials, and at least one undocumented passenger. None of this appeared in the official reports from 1912. The inquiries at the time portrayed the disaster as something unavoidable. They claimed that the iceberg was the only cause of the tragedy. The new evidence suggested something different. It pointed toward failures and oversights that had been hidden from the public. These discoveries strengthened a disturbing possibility. The official story was not merely incomplete. Important information may have been softened or suppressed. But to know exactly how much was hidden, historians needed to revisit the testimonies and inquiries that shaped the Titanic legend and compare them with the photographic truth unfolding before them. The inquiries that protected the powerful and buried the truth. The British wreck. Commissioner's inquiry of 1912 and the American Senate inquiry that followed had long been treated as the final word on what happened that night. For many years, people trusted them without question. Yet once the investigators compared the newly enhanced shipyard photographs to the official findings, the differences became impossible to overlook. The inquiries described the Titanic as a strong and carefully constructed ship. They insisted that the vessel met every major safety expectation and that its operation followed standard procedure. But the photographs told a very different story. The enhanced images revealed steel that appeared visibly weakened even before the voyage began. The rivets that were meant to hold the ship together looked uneven and fragile. These issues raised questions that the inquiries never addressed. The official records also dismissed the existence of any coal fire before the ship left port. The thermal patterns captured on the hull in the photographs proved that such a fire had burned long enough to weaken the structure. This new evidence left researchers stunned because it suggested that the ship entered the Atlantic with serious vulnerabilities. The iceberg warnings created the most disturbing conflict. The inquiries listed only a few messages. The enhanced crew photos showed a warning that never appeared in the official records. The presence of that missing message suggested that communication inside the ship had failed in ways that the inquiries never revealed. Researchers now believe that the inquiries had two main goals. They were meant to give the public an explanation that felt complete. They were also meant to protect the White Star Line and the industries connected to it. The British government wanted to defend its shipbuilding reputation. American officials wanted answers that appeared simple enough for the public to accept without protest. These pressures shaped the official story. All of the emerging evidence pointed to one conclusion. The official narrative was not simply incomplete. It had been shaped very carefully. It had been presented in a way that protected powerful institutions. Yet one final task remained. The investigators needed to fit all the evidence into a single timeline. They had the Guggenheim photographs, the newly enhanced shipyard images, and the contradictions inside the official inquiries. To understand the full truth, they needed to bring every piece together and reconstruct the Titanic's final hours as they truly unfolded. Reconstructing the real final hours. Once the researchers placed every decoded frame, every enhanced photograph, and every corrected timestamp into a single timeline, a disturbing picture began to form. This new sequence of events did not resemble the familiar account that generations had believed. The truth had been scattered across forgotten records and lost images, but when finally assembled, it created a detailed and chilling reconstruction of the night the Titanic sank. The timeline began much earlier than anyone expected. In the late afternoon, passengers could be seen clearly pointing toward distant ice. This simple moment was important because it directly challenged the old claim that the iceberg appeared without any warning. People on deck had observed signs of danger long before the collision. Their expressions in the photographs showed a mix of curiosity and concern, which made the official statements seem even more misleading. The coal fire evidence appeared next. The areas weakened by heat were the same sections of the hull that failed first when the ship struck the ice. The Titanic did not merely scrape against the iceberg, it broke apart at points already damaged by the fire. Researchers felt shaken as they realized that the disaster had begun long before the collision itself. The timeline also revealed the growing confusion around the lifeboats. As the early morning hours arrived, the photographs showed officers hesitating as they tried to load the boats. They were not confident that the davits could safely lower fully occupied lifeboats. Their faces reflected fear and doubt, which created delays and forced them to make quick decisions in the dark. This explained why some lifeboats left without being filled to capacity. The official inquiries had described the evacuation as organized. The truth was far more chaotic. At 1:55 a.m., the timeline delivered a revelation about Captain Smith. Many accounts claimed that he disappeared from view during the final stage of the sinking. The newly enhanced photo of him inside the wheelhouse proved that he remained on duty much longer than previously believed. He could be seen giving instructions with a calm but desperate focus. This single moment dramatically changed the understanding of his final actions. The timeline also confirmed the presence of the band on the slanted deck. Their determined playing was captured in the photographs, which supported the testimonies that had often been viewed with doubt. The musicians remained at their positions until the situation became too dangerous. Their faces showed a mix of courage and sorrow as the water rose around them. As the final minutes unfolded, the timeline exposed the painful truth that the sinking was not an unavoidable accident. It was the result of ignored warnings, weakened steel, mismanaged evacuation efforts, and a series of decisions made under intense and unfamiliar pressure. Each issue could appear minor when viewed alone, but when combined, they created a tragedy that could no longer be attributed to chance. For 110 years, the real story rested at the bottom of the ocean. Only with the discovery of the preserved camera and the assistance of advanced imaging technology could the world finally see what truly happened. The real story was not comforting. It was filled with fear, misjudgment, and consequences that could have been prevented. Thank you for staying with us to the end. Kindly subscribe to the channel for more amazing videos.